I'm Adam. I'm the product designer for the Mid Shop.
I'm Kim. I am co-founder with Mark, and I'm the shop manager.
I'm Amber, and I'm the product manager.
So I'll be doing most of the talking, not because I'm good at it or enjoy it, but because I drew the short straw. We're gonna do question and answers at the end, and if I forget anything, jump in. So yeah, we're the Made Shop, which is basically what it sounds like. It's this small shop where we make things. By small, our entire staff can carpool to work together. By making things, that's a little harder to pin down. Sometimes I feel like every day we're a different design shop. We do logo and traditional branding work. We also do product and packaging design. We do album, film, and stage art for like Broadway shows and things like that. We also do traditional print work and collateral for stores and restaurants. Some of these you may have been to. My background's in architecture, so we also do some spatial and interior design. I'm not licensed, but we do it. And we also do interactive and web design. We're the creative direction team for a company called Hit Record. If you're not familiar with it, the actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt started this sort of online collaborative production company. So we designed the software, the mobile and web apps, and people from all around the world can join and upload their work and remix each other's work. And most recently, we've done 2 seasons of television, one of which actually won an Emmy. I didn't think if I was ever going to win an award in architecture school that it would be an Emmy, but we'll take it. So that's a brief introduction to a bunch of the things we do. But today, we wanted to talk about risk. So when Sydney invited us to speak, we looked through the list of topics for 2016, and it was like an immediate, obvious choice to all of us that we wanted to talk about risk. We have a complicated relationship to this. It's sort of a love-hate feeling. I think some of our most interesting work is our riskiest work. But we as a shop, like we as a culture, are risk averse. I think we all tend to think of risk as a negative value, a necessary evil for some potential reward. And I think that's true. But I think specifically in creative professions, it's helpful to think of risk as a virtue in and of itself. So what does it mean to be risk averse besides preferring monopoly? I think, at least for us, it's a preference for things that are safe, things that are guaranteed, things that are predictable. And those terms, as we were talking, they seemed to all have something to do with an amount of expertise. At least that's in our practice, how we think about it. So as creative professionals, a big part of what we sell is expertise. And I think when you go to a professional, part of what you're looking for is an expert to mitigate risk. And we sort of deal with this zone of risk by carving out a space of expertise. You can mitigate that risk by learning things, by repeating things, by getting better at things, by getting more efficient at doing things. And efficiency, I think, is an interesting part of this feeling of risk aversion. Because if this is a zone of efficiency and expertise, and this is the risky zone outside of it, that's a zone of inefficiency. And I think that goes a long way to explaining why we are risk averse as a culture, because culturally, we think of efficiency as this unmitigated virtue. We think of it in the same sort of train of thought of things like responsibility or discipline or courage. Inefficiency, on the other hand, I actually Googled the virtue of inefficiency for this talk, and Google made an interesting suggestion. So, expert work, efficient work, it's organized, it's effective, it's skillful, productive. And you think maybe inefficient is just the opposite of those things, but it's incompetent, inept, unprofessional, lousy, useless, good for nothing. So culturally, we don't just avoid inefficiency, we hate it. And it struck me that this might have come from a specific time and place and a specific idea, which is that time equals money. And that idea was born on assembly lines. It was invented by car manufacturers during the Industrial Revolution for a really specific purpose. And if your goal is to churn out the same thing with as little risk of variation or deviation as possible, then efficiency is fantastic. But that's not the goal of design. Just the opposite. We're not trying to churn out the same thing over and over again with as little variation and with all the interesting edges rounded off. This GIF and these GIFs are from one of my favorite shows, How It's Made. Do you guys know this show? And I love it. It's super relaxing, and I also love it because it's all these super creative, intelligent people have spent so much time designing these systems that minimize waste and risk and inefficiency, and there's so much creativity on display, and so much effort, and brilliant people have thought about the virtue of efficiency, and we've written books about it, but who's championing risk? So here's our risk champion. He's going to be our mascot for today's talk. And he has inspired us to fill this gap, this book that's missing about inefficiency and risk. We're calling it Risky Business Practices, a compendium of inefficiency and practice. And we want to share a few pretend chapters from our pretend book today. The first of which is creating arbitrary constraints. Any project has so many limitations built into it: time, money, your own experience, the project requirements, and then all these other ones as well that are less clearly defined, like maybe your age or your gender or your connections. And we think of these as negative. They restrict what's possible, but things that restrict what's possible aren't always bad. A funnel restricts what's possible, and it's really useful. It takes every possible path and it puts it in a useful direction, and focuses your energy. And so sometimes we even find ourselves creating additional arbitrary limitations. One of our favorite artists is Ryan Lott of the band Sun Lux. Excuse me. And he accepted this challenge that NPR issues every February to write, record, and release an album in 28 days, which is insane. And he made this beautiful album 4 or 5 years ago. And towards the end of the process, he's like, oh shit, I don't have album art. And he called us and said, can you guys make an album? And we're like, great. He's like, you've got 2 weeks. And we're like, And we were super busy, and that didn't seem possible. And we needed more time, but then we thought, what if it was a weekend, we said, we've got a day. What if we did the entire album in 28 hours, and whatever we could make in 28 hours would be the album cover, and he loved the idea, so this is
Morning. It is
album.
10:50 on Sunday, and we are headed down Federal in Denver, Colorado to the fireworks store. The plan is to do the entire record cover for the new Sunbox album in 28 hours, since we recorded the whole thing in 28 days. And if all goes according to plan, we are gonna shoot 20 smoke bombs going off in a parking lot behind
Without a permit.
houses on top of a crane, and then cut out the Sunlux title out of the smoke.
That's my older brother.
Feel safe. Safety is priority number 2 here at the lead shop.
That's our unpaid intern. That was why you get a permit. So this is back in the shop after the end of the shoot. And we were gearing up for an all-nighter, getting all the photos in, adjusting them. I'm going to skip through some of this just so we can show more projects. But here's the end of the video and the final album cover. Working with tools you've never used is another risky business practice. When we were kids, so 2 people who aren't here today, my older brother and younger brother, they're out in LA, they're our LA chapter. And we had this book, I don't know if any of you are familiar, Industrial Light and Magic, on repeated loan under 3 of our names from the library. So it's just always at our house and we never had to take it back. But so Industrial Light and Magic was George Lucas's special effects studio for the first Star Wars films and things like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones. And we fell in love with it because these were movies we loved, and it was just people making like our dreams out of these physical things, in some cases like literally trash. And I think it instilled this idea that material really matters. This photo was our favorite in the book, and we would just get lost in it, looking at all the characters and the props and everything. And comparing that to how we make movies now, obviously this is a very efficient way to make a movie, but it's lacking something besides like a bunch of really cool robots, and I think it's lacking friction, which I think is a word we associate with things like inefficiency, maybe with risk. When I look at a space like this, it feels slippery, like being on a lake and trying to get across it. You can't move without friction. It's, yes, friction resists you, but it's also what lets you move forward. So we've been thinking of a kind of creative resistance that happens when you work with materials or tools, especially ones you've never used before. Adobe asked us to reimagine their logo a couple of years ago. And like most of our projects, it started at Home Depot. This one also involved a trip to the pet store. That's Adam. Actually, Adam, do you want to talk about this project?
Yeah, so Adobe came to us and kind of asked us to remix their logo. It started with sort of similar sketches that Mark and I had of kind of this invisible box and kind of filling it with things. And kind of the idea was that the software is this invisible piece, and that what you put into it is what you bring to it. So we spent 7 days filling this box with different things, and all 7 days were an adventure. So the first day was we had done goldfish.
It's material we've never worked with.
Yeah. And we quickly found out the limitations of that. The goldfish, the people at the pet store did not want to sell us goldfish because the water was not aerated correctly. We also realized that the box, when it was filled with the stones and the water, weighed about 800 pounds, which we were not prepared to handle.
We did aerate the water.
Yeah, we did aerate the water, and we did figure out how to hold it up, and all the fish made it back to the pet store safely. So.
To be sold again.
Yeah, to be sold again. Day 4, we did pencils, and that essentially we did pencils 3 ways. The erasers, the shavings, and the pencils themselves. Quickly learned an efficient method to sharpening a pencil, which is a power drill. After many attempts at trying to do it manually.
Hold on, there's a shot of power drill. You just had
Yeah,
to
there it is.
That's
Really satisfying if anybody wants to try that. And then the last day we did smoke bombs, which is one I think we sort of thought we had in the can, and that it was going to go the way we thought, but quickly realized that it wasn't producing the image that we wanted it to produce.
That's the image we wanted. That's what was happening.
And that's what was happening. And sometimes it would get really full with smoke, and it would just sort of look dense. So this is sort of where the material aspect comes in, because we essentially just started putting smoke bombs in this thing and seeing what would happen. Mark actually I think at one point just started throwing like 3 or 4 smoke bombs in that time. And what happened was this really beautiful sort of painterly effect on the inside that I don't think any of us would have anticipated happening unless we just really started working with the material more.
It turned out to be, I think, all of our favorite.
Yeah.
Here's all 7 we made. So yeah, we did coffee and sugar, flowers, dirt, gumballs. That was actually our favorite. That was really easy. Starting with the wrong answer. So I feel like in this realm of expertise and what we're selling to clients, we often end up feeling wrongly, I suspect, that our job is to sell an answer. The client has a question, they're paying us to give them an answer. But I was reading Mike Montero's book, which maybe some of you have read if you haven't. It's really great. But he was talking about early on in meetings with clients, often they're asking, what's the website going to look like? He does web design. And his answer often is, well, we don't know, but we know the process for getting there. And that made us ask ourselves, like, well, what are we selling? Are we selling a product or are we selling a process? Because if we're selling a product, then efficiency and expertise are your friends. But if we're selling a process, then risk and inefficiency are just unavoidable. It's baked into the process. And my favorite design is process-driven. It's clearly comes from people thinking about design as a process and not a product. So a few years ago, we had been doing some work with the band, The Fray, album covers, and they did something they hadn't done before, which was a covers album. They were sort of in between albums and wanting to just I think, just explore and play. It actually felt very process-driven. I think they were just doing it because they wanted to play music together and not worry about the product. But it was a beautiful album, and they asked us to do the cover for it. And we had this idea to just like sort of literally cover everything up because it was a covers album. So we went to their studio and we pitched the idea to them, and we didn't know exactly what it would look like. We thought it'd be cool, but it was more about this process, and they were excited to be involved. Like, they came and helped wrap all their instruments in this white material, and I think it was like cathartic for them or something. But over the course of a few days, we just wrapped everything in their studio in white. The band was helping out, and at the end of the process, they just all put on all white outfits, except someone who thought Ecru was white. And we took photos of it, and that was the final album cover. And I think it's my favorite album cover we did for them. Another chapter, Ignorance is Bliss. If this were a fake chapter in our fake book, it would start with my favorite T.S. Eliot quote. He says, "You must go by a way which is the way of ignorance in order to possess what you don't possess." Which, I love that thought. Like, put more simply in non-T.S. Eliot speak, it's basically the idea that if you want to do something you don't know how to do, you don't know how to do it. And it seems obvious, but it's a really refreshing and freeing thought, because I think ignorance is a really super negative feeling, especially in a professional context. This thought that I don't know how to do this, when your job is to know how to do the thing you've been hired to do. Like, obviously we don't want to admit that. But a friend of mine talks about ignorance and this feeling of being wrong in a refreshing way. He says the feeling of being wrong is actually the feeling of becoming more right. And I like that, because if you're super worried about feeling wrong, which I am, you either get stubborn and you sort of resist admitting that you're wrong, or you avoid doing something new. And you're immediately, if you're avoiding doing something new in the realm of cliche, you're either repeating yourself or you're repeating something you've seen before. I love this word cliche. I like how it sounds. And I like its etymology, which is interesting. It actually comes from when we hand-set typography. So a cliche was a thing. It was when a word or a phrase was used so often, the typesetters would actually just weld it together into a cliche. And it's a very efficient process. If your job was to print a book, it's an efficient process. It's your best friend. If your job is to write a book, well, obviously, like cliches, we want to avoid. So Adobe actually came back to us. They have a magazine called Inspire that they were relaunching. They asked us to do the magazine cover, and we had been thinking a lot about cliches at the time. Honestly, the word inspire is a little cliched, and we thought, what if we just make the biggest cliche we can? So this was the design brief, and we thought we'd make a giant physical word to be used once, and we'd make it out of light bulbs, like the inspiration light bulb popping on over your head. So this is the biggest cliche. Okay, we'll turn them on. Some detailed shots of our cliche. And there was an interactive version as well, where you could click on the various outlets to turn on relaunch the magazine. So, speaking of inspirational, I think this next chapter in the book is my favorite inspirational chapter. It's called The Long, Hard, Stupid Way, which is, if we have any expertise, it's in working this way. I didn't have a name for it. We've done it for a long time, but I was reading The Shape of Design, Frank Chimero's book, another great book. And in it, he's talking about David Chang, who's the head chef at Momofuku in New York. It's one of my favorite restaurants. And there's this story where a sous chef comes to David Chang and is like, hey, we can do this thing much easier, much quicker, and the result will be identical. And David Chang said, I know that, but at Momofuku we do things the long, hard, stupid way. And I feel like there's a bit of a magic trick that happens working this way. Literally a magic trick, actually. Teller of Penn and Teller had this quote that I love about a trick. He said, "Make the secret a lot more trouble than the trick seems worth. You'll be fooled by a trick if it involves more time, money, and practice than you or any other sane onlooker would be willing to invest." So, my younger brother, also in LA, he's an artist, a painter, and an illustrator. And we've been making these alternate posters for my cousin Ryan Johnson's movies. And he had finished this one for Looper. It was an oil-painted poster. And he kept painting scenes from it. And he started painting more and more and had this idea to make the longest, hardest, stupidest movie trailer. Here it is. Which he started just for fun, but the producers ended up using it as one of their official trailers, and afterwards he swore he would never do another project like that. He's since done 3 more of them. I feel like we have a little bit of a rivalry in the May Shop now of finding the longest, hardest, and stupidest way to animate, and I think my older brother and I, and all of us on this next project figured it out. So we got 300 feet of thread and 3,000 push pins and used a piece of foam core to frame by frame animate a music video. This is again for the band Sunlux. So I'll play that for you now. It recently screened at South by Southwest, which was super cool for me. So, this risk had a reward anyway. I mean, we don't know how to make music videos, we don't know how to animate. If we did, we wouldn't have done that. But the band actually loved it so much, and they're like, oh, they make music videos, and so they actually gave us a proper budget, and we had a set and a cast and a crew, and we made a related music video. Actually, it had Tatiana Maslany from Orphan Black in it, which is one of my favorite shows, and it was wow, we don't know what we're doing, but we're now making a real music video, which is risky, and I think is exactly what our final chapter and favorite would be about in this silly book. Saying yes to projects you're clearly unqualified for. So if you couldn't tell, we're big fans of Charles and Ray Eames. We've modeled our shop after them in more ways than one. You probably know their furniture, maybe their architecture, but I fell in love with the way they worked and all of this crazy stuff outside their lane that they did, that they were clearly unqualified to do, because who could be? They were making films for the government and weird experimental short films and just playing and I ran across this quote. Someone was talking about how they worked, how they were able to work that way. And he said, if you sell your expertise, you have a limited repertoire. If you sell your ignorance, it's an unlimited repertoire. So, oh, that's a great idea. How do you sell your ignorance? Eames was selling his ignorance and his desire to learn about a subject, and that journey of him not knowing to knowing was his work. And I think that's such a exciting thought, and it motivates so much of what we do, because I think we have this thought that there's sort of a zone of not knowing and a zone of knowing, and you spend most of your life, going to school, and you graduate, you go to graduate school, you intern, and you arrive at this place of knowing, and then you begin your work. But I think it's more interesting, certainly more profitable, to think of this whole zone as your work. And if you do, then it breaks down, I think, like this. This is a zone of risk, and this is a zone of expertise, and it's not that one is better than the other. It's that if you're only working from a zone of expertise, you can literally only do what you've done before. And you have to have that element of risk and curiosity. And if you sell, I've had people ask, is it irresponsible to sell ignorance? And it's, in my mind, it'd be irresponsible not to, because otherwise you're just selling something you've made before. And I think the distinctions start to fall away, and it's just about effective, interesting, curious work. So yeah, thank you all for coming. We'd love to answer any questions.